Comrades, brothers and sisters, today the working class is in crisis, a big crisis. Even as the capitalist class worldwide is in its greatest economic crisis since the 1930s, a crisis they cannot get out of. This massive capitalist economic crisis should have led to a fight back by the workers, but hasn't done that yet, but will. This contradiction between the economic crisis and the lack of a fight back is a contradiction that cannot last. The workers will eventually rebel against this constantly increasing attack on their living standards. This defensive attitude for the workers and their failure to rebel is a result created by the disappearance of the worker states in Eastern Europe and the overthrow of the Soviet Union and the encroachment of capitalism into communist China. This has resulted in an unfortunate but temporary worldwide movement away from Marxism as the leading ideology of revolution, and caused workers to lose faith in their own ability to defeat the capitalist ruling class. The high-tech revolution is eliminating higher paid jobs, as well as contracting the number of workers required in production. The elimination of higher paid jobs is narrowing the economic base of support for the social democratic parties. But due to the overthrow of the worker states, the political support for the social democratic parties worldwide has temporarily increased enormously. This is another contradiction that also cannot last. The destruction of the jobs for those in the misnamed middle class, really the aristocracy of labor, will eventually mean the weakening of the social democratic parties, because that is their political base, the higher paid workers. With the degeneration and subsequent overthrow of the worker states, labor has been on the defensive and confused for the last several decades. As a result, the new generation of workers has to be reintroduced to Marxism-Leninism as the only way forward for defense of their rights and their living standards. This video is directed towards those activists who are trying to understand how workers can defeat the capitalist ruling class and make the revolution that they so desire to have happen. This video is directed towards reintroducing our class to Marxism-Leninism and is a call for unity amongst Marxist-Leninists. The 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Tsarist Russia is the revolutionary template, not because I say so, but because all the successful worker revolutions that came after the Bolshevik Revolution were led by Marxist-Leninists, inspired by that Bolshevik Revolution. You talk about China, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, Korea, Yugoslavia, Albania. Even the almost successful worker revolutions were also led by Marxist-Leninists. Germany in 1919 and 1923, Italy, France, and Greece in World War II. And there are others that you could name. There has not been a single successful anarchist worker revolution. Why? Because we face the most well-organized and powerful ruling classes the world has ever seen. And our anarchism is just the most extreme version of bourgeois liberalism. Anarchism, while attractive because it appeals to a direct, immediate physical confrontation with the ruling class on the most democratic basis, is an appeal to the undisciplined mind that has been carefully nurtured by the mythology that's inherent in bourgeois ideology. Anarchism, yes, is a statement of faith in the working class's political ability to make a revolution on its own, without a trained and disciplined leadership that is needed to lead and organize such a revolution. If it was so easy to make a revolution, why hasn't it been done? The workers are huge. There's so many millions more workers than the tiny ruling class. The numbers should be easy for them to make a revolution, but they haven't. Because the workers require a political party to lead them, precisely because no such organization has ever developed automatically from within the working class. The workers and the peasants have always made up the foot soldiers of every army. The job of the Workers' Party is to win the allegiance of the workers for the purpose of overthrowing the rule of their capitalist oppressors. The bourgeois state that we confront has armies, has police, has the CIA, NSA, and all those intelligent, MI5, whatever you want, has courts, has judges, has jails, and above all, and probably the most important, even more important than the military, has a media propaganda machine that dwarfs anything seen in human history. It is, purpose is to focus human minds on the wrong things at all times, and it's been very successful in doing so. It's very successful in dividing worker from worker and telling workers that they're not workers. It's an incredible machine to send lies and create lies and so that they can invade countries, etc., etc. To think that workers can defeat that powerful state apparatus without a dedicated and highly trained and disciplined fighters and organizers that are linked together in a political party that has won the allegiance of the working class is silly and counterproductive. The working class must have at hand the beginning of its own state apparatus that will replace the ruling class state apparatus at the very moment of the seizure of power. A political party made up of dedicated, experienced, and highly skilled political leaders and fighters is the leadership that is required for such a transformation of society. That party has been shown in practice, in history, to be Marxist-Leninist. Going forward from today, the Marxist-Leninist political party has the hard job of convincing a majority of the working class that it is an organization that can defeat the most powerful ruling class in human history. Many revolutions are lost because the working class, even though it wants a revolution, has no faith that that particular leadership can lead them to victory, but will only lead them to defeat, which would be disastrous. So that you have to not only win the allegiance, but you have to win their confidence that you can do that job successfully and that they won't be totally hurt by it. Problem. There are a host of small, mostly small, organizations that call themselves Marxist-Leninists. Yes, some areas of the globe there may be larger groups, but for the most part, since the overthrow of the Soviet Union and the encroachment of capitalism in China, the leadership of the movement has shrunk, and you have lots of small groups. All these groups that call themselves Marxist-Leninists cannot be Marxist-Leninists, or else they'd all be together in the same organization. The problem is that anyone or any group can call themselves anything they like. Marxism, Leninism is a rubric under which all sorts of groups can claim they're the real Marxist-Leninists. This is a problem that goes back to the days of Marx himself. Karl Marx objected to being called a Marxist simply because of all the groups and individuals calling themselves Marxists. There has to be a way to distinguish the wheat from the chaff amongst this smorgasbord of Marxist-Leninist groups, and I believe there is. Here are the basic items that I believe should distinguish the Marxist-Leninists from the pretenders. One, they must, of course, be in political support for the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Tsarist Russia, but straight through to the 1991 overthrow of the Soviet Union, the complete period, regardless of all the criticisms, justified criticisms of the leadership of the Soviet Union. Not to understand that the overthrow of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy for the worldwide working class in all of human history is to state that one does not know which side of the class barricade one is on. Two, support for the 1949 Chinese Communist Revolution, the second greatest revolution in human history, but right through to this date, not just 1949. Regardless of all the political and economic backsliding that has occurred in China, it all comes down again to which side are you on, the capitalist or the workers? Support, number three, support for the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which was a failed attempt to prevent Communist China from beginning to take the first steps on the capitalist road. Once again, failure to understand what this revolution was all about places oneself on the wrong side of the barricade between the workers and the capitalist class. Number four, that the dictatorship of the proletariat must be immediately established over the former capitalist rulers, which that becomes an interim requirement after the revolution for the transition from capitalism to socialism. This is required by the victorious workers so as to ensure that the capitalists never return to power. 5. Lenin showed that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalist rule. Therefore, anti-imperialism is the highest form of the fight against the capitalist rulers. Then it follows that solidarity today with Syria and Iran and the DPRK, North Korea, is required because they are the three countries most targeted today by imperialism. And in the past, that solidarity was required with Iraq, Libya, and Yugoslavia when they came under military attack, and even before that, political attack by U.S.-led imperialism. In addition, 6, because this is a special case, this solidarity has to extend to the Palestinians and also to Hezbollah in Lebanon, which are under the direct attack by Wall Street's primary proxy in the Middle East, which is the apartheid state of Israel. 7, absolute support for all struggles of the oppressed inside the imperialist countries. These include struggles against racism, against oppression of nationalities inside the country, against all these anti-immigrant attacks, against attacks on women, attacks on LGBTQ people, and also, even more so, a defense of all the democratic rights won by working people, and defense of the unions that represent those workers. And finally, and most important, is number 8. And this, the other 7 don't matter if you don't do number 8. If a group passes all those other things, they must pass this test. That of putting their politics into mass organizing. Theory without practice is sterile. We do not need armchair revolutionaries who've read all the books, but have no clue as how to talk to and organize the oppressed. Their practice is more important, but the leaders have to know the theory and have to know what direction to take. So many an organizer might not have all the understanding, all the theories, may not be great speakers and organizers, but if they understand all this and do mass organizing, they're as good a communist as anybody. But the leadership, the brain, has to lead the body. If a group fails even one of the above tests, especially number 8, it isn't a Marxist, Leninist group or party. Unfortunately, there's still another problem. And that's there are groups that will agree to all the above and do mass work. Then why are they in separate groups or parties? Unfortunately, historical experience has created this problem. History cannot be ignored. This historical experience has to be unlearned before the actual needed history for the future can be learned. Let me give you my best example of this historical experience that has to be unlearned. Just one example of many. In 1956, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev launched a political attack on Joseph Stalin. Khrushchev revealed many of the crimes of Stalin. Much of what Khrushchev stated was true, But Marxists are never supposed to be fooled by words. Yet most at that time were fooled and failed to make a Marxist analysis. It is deeds that count. Words and political parties and constitutions are part of the superstructure. But the economics and the physical actions are the core structures and facts that Marxists are supposed to be looking at. I was a young communist in 1956, a 12-year-old red diaper baby here in the United States, in New York City. I had a picture of Stalin on the wall over my bed with two crossed machetes, real machetes, framing Stalin's portrait underneath it. At that time, I was shocked and confused to see that the New York Times reported the Khrushchev attack on Stalin when the U.S. Communist Party and no other communist party knew anything about Khrushchev's attack. Khrushchev, in other words, went first to the main propaganda weapon of imperialism in order to do a surprise attack on the communist movement worldwide in the form of an attack on Stalin. Khrushchev then opened up the Soviet jails and let out anti-communists while continuing to the suppression of the left as represented by Trotsky's followers. Khrushchev followed up the attack on Stalin by politically empowering the managerial bureaucracy in the Soviet Union by changing the Soviet constitution, eliminating the dictatorship of the proletariat, the dictatorship of the workers. Now managers could be elected to the Soviets. By the end of the Soviet regime under Gorbachev, 80% of the Soviets were now managers. That's how, over time, it devolved. Originally, only a worker could be a member of the Soviet. What would Trotsky, if Trotsky had been alive, have been Trotsky's response to this situation, to Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin? Stalin had killed thousands of his followers. He was one of the main victims. He was the main victim. Would Trotsky, had he been alive, have felt vindicated by Khrushchev's revelations? Trotsky would have denounced Khrushchev's revelations. Trotsky, being the most prominent victim of Stalin's terror against the original leaders of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, would not have made his political decision based upon personal revenge. That would be anti-Marxist. Trotsky would have asked simple questions. What was the purpose of Khrushchev's attack on Stalin? Who benefits from the attack on Stalin? What was the purpose of going to the New York Times? Why was only the right-wing anti-communist prisoners released? And most importantly, how would this attack affect the collective ownership of the means of production that still existed in the Soviet Union? Trotsky would have seen that Khrushchev was acting on behalf of the privileged portion of the Soviet bureaucracy that now saw their opportunity to gain political rights in addition to their economic privileges over the workers. Now that Stalin was dead, They feared Stalin. He was their conduit into the party, but now that he was dead, they felt that they could also grab political rights. So Khrushchev's attack was an attack on socialism, hidden behind the attack on Stalin. Now, it's not that a privileged bureaucracy, and that includes the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union, was openly anti-Soviet, anti-socialist in their thinking. No, bureaucracies like our municipal and corporate and even the union bureaucracies are fundamentally apolitical. They don't have an ideology of their own. That's for the leadership. The bureaucracy just wants to get its work done, give orders, receive orders. But they are the transmission belts for the interests of those most politically influential. Here in the capitalist countries, the bureaucracy is the transmission belt for the policies and opinions of the capitalist bosses. Unfortunately, when Stalin eliminated the left in the Soviet Union, during that terror against the original leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution, Stalin eliminated the pressure from the left on the Soviet bureaucracy. The resulting outside pressures were from two sources, both of which from the right. That came from the privileged individuals, the higher paid, more privileged individuals within the Soviet Union could now put pressure on the bureaucracy where there was no left, and the imperialists themselves externally, with both their carrots and their threats, would be an even more serious pressure on that bureaucracy. Both of these pressures are anti-socialist and come from the right, and therefore the bureaucracy that Khrushchev was speaking for was transmitting the anti-socialist opinions of those from the right who were the privileged and the external pressures from the imperialists. Trotsky understood and was always looking forward to that the only way to prevent the USSR, prevent the Soviet Union from a capitalist restoration was a reinvigoration of the left within Soviet society. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and eventually the right was able to overthrow the Soviet Union. Trotsky's politics, therefore, and opinion about Khrushchev's statements on Stalin were at the polar opposite of what politically was involved when Khrushchev denounced Stalin. They would never have agreed on anything. Trotsky would have seen that this attack on Stalin would only encourage anti-socialist elements all over the globe and would decimate communist parties everywhere. And it did. Half the membership of communist parties all over the world, including here in the United States, left the parties. And the parties were split and broken in many ways. It was a disaster for the worldwide communist movement. It was a gift to the imperialists, one of the greatest gifts that they ever received. It was a sneak attack, especially on the idea of socialism itself. It demoralized the working class worldwide. I repeat, and I know a lot of people who claim they follow Trotsky or Stalin won't understand this, but Trotsky in 1956 would have defended Stalin. Not defense of Stalin's obvious crimes against the left. That would be unthinkable. But defense of Stalin was a defense of socialism, not of Stalin's crimes. It was an absolute necessity and the most Marxist thing that anyone could do at that time, to defend Stalin. You were defending the working class. You were defending socialism by doing so. Trotsky considered Stalin the same way that Lenin did. Lenin stated about Stalin that Stalin was a bad cook who made spicy dishes. Trotsky looked at Stalin as a centrist. What's a centrist? A centrist is somebody without ideas. Centrist is a person who is between ideological wings, who would, depending on what pressure comes from which wing, that's the way the center always swings. They put their finger up in the air. Oh, pressure's coming this way, then I got to go that way. So on. You see that in the union all the time. The union bureaucrat, the union leadership, or union staff, or so on like that. They sniff out which way the wind is blowing, and they try to get in front of that wind as much as show that they're the leaders. But they don't have ideology of their own. And that's what a centrist is, and that's why a centrist is quite often so damaging. You see that in our union movement here. Stalin's leadership was a disaster for the communist movements all over the world because of this lack of ideology and swinging back and forth. It was, the Communist parties got whipsawed back and forth, and they were badly damaged. Trotsky considered Stalin as the wrecker of revolution, not the opponent of revolution, not the opponent of socialist revolution, the wrecker of it. Stalin, as a centrist, was a centrist communist. Bukharin, who started out on the left and ended up in alliance with Stalin on the right, and then further to the right of Stalin later, also was a communist. And Trotsky was a communist to the left of Stalin. As a centrist, because of his lack of ideology, and a leader who was pushed one way or other, depending on the various pressures, became the transition belt into the Communist Party for the interest of the privileged bureaucracy, who were so massive and had developed so massively in the Soviet Union. Whereas Bukharin, because the country was so underdeveloped, so majority of peasants, illiterate peasants, and wanting to see how they could get enough funds to develop socialism there, he became the transmission belt into the Communist Party for the better off peasants, especially the kulaks, who were actually the most efficient of the peasants, and through taxation would be best able to gather funds, tax funds, for the Soviet Union to develop their industry. So you end up with left, a right, and a center within the Communist Party who are looking at the possible future for the party in different ways. Trotsky wanted the Soviet Union to pressure for 5-year plans for industrialization right away. Bukharin and Stalin initially attacked him for being a super industrialist, saying they can't do that. If we tax the peasants, there's going to be rebellions and so on and so forth. Ultimately, once Stalin eliminated the left pressure from Trotsky, then he swung to the left and attacked Bukharin for being a plaything of the kulaks. It's for the transmission into the party of the interest of the better off peasants. This problem became a problem of you ended with a party that was without a left right and a center. By doing that, they ended the democratic process within the party. The existence of a left, a center, and a right is a normal feature of any mass party, be it bourgeois or proletarian. Such was the case in the Soviet Union up until the death of Lenin. Pravda, the newspaper of the Communist Party, all the way up until the death of Lenin, would print the political positions of all the opposing factions in the Communist Party in the newspaper prior to vote on any question of policy, even during the height of the Civil War. No political leader, including Lenin or Trotsky, was immune from attack on their political positions. And these opposing views were duly published in the party newspaper, Pravda. Yes, unity was required after the issue was democratically decided, after the votes. But debate prior to the vote was considered a requirement for a healthy party regime. Stalin's greatest crime was not against individuals, even though he killed lots. Stalin's greatest crime was against the ideology of the party. It was creation of a monolithic sectarian attitude that prevented dialogue within the party and any unity on the left against the capitalist ruling class. Stalin's sectarianism undermined the battle of ideas, which should have been a huge advantage for the left, for the members of the party, against the reactionary and stupid ruling classes. They are completely ignorant individuals who have no understanding of not only history, but of what's going on around them, other than they want to protect their profits. The brain must lead the body. Activism without ideological clarity is self-defeating. The Marxist-Leninist party must come to be viewed by the most advanced ideologically in our class society as the place where the most advanced ideas are discussed and acted upon. Ours is a revolution that must challenge the bourgeoisie in every aspect of social relations, be they in science, in the arts, in sports, or the family itself. The question then becomes, how do we get back to that non-sectarian political practice that occurred under Lenin after so many decades of sectarian practice, sectarian actions that have only served to strengthen capitalist rule? Who benefits by this sectarianism? The capitalists benefit. Before we can get true internationalism, we'll need more cooperation between all individuals, parties, and groups that can agree to the fundamental issues I delineated previously. Unity on these principles is possible if the will is there. This is unity that does not require that groups surrender their political beliefs. upon entry into the consolidated party. Every individual and every group that wants to make this revolution and that adheres to the basic tenets should be able to keep their original ideas and not be worried about that they have to, hold to some sectarian ideology. We're not in a church here. This is a revolutionary organization that wants to overthrow the ruling classes. The Bolsheviks in 1917 had a party leadership, not just the membership, the leadership that had a left, a center, and a right. That's a healthy thing, not a defect. It's how they were able to win the allegiance of the workers and make the revolution. Why can't a new communist party, Marxist-Leninist party, come into being with a left, a right, and a center? Provided that the party would live up to the basic principles I previously delineated. Again, if we agree on all those basic questions and are actively doing mass work based on that, then why shouldn't we pool our energy and resources to better focus the struggle? Why have scattered groups all over the place working without any coordination? The only victor in that case is the ruling classes. Could not followers of Trotsky and Stalin cooperate within the same party? I think so. They did cooperate prior to the death of Lenin. Yes, they did cooperate prior to the death of Lenin. Why not cooperate rather than continue to carry the albatross of several decades of sectarian history? Why carry that albatross around and display it to everyone? How does that help the struggle? My plea is simple. With this economic crisis that's happening now for the ruling class, and they're going down, there's no better time than now to start the process of unity. The capitalist class, they're in decay, in economic decay, but militarily they're very powerful. Why give them an easy road to remain in power by failing to unify? Yes, there will be bumps in the road and internal party disputes which might become vitriolic at times. But that's okay, that's normal. And that's the only road to victory that I can see. If we are to become a mass proletarian leadership in the struggle against the capitalist class, we need to find a way to cooperate and do mass work together that can lead to thence to cooperation on an international scale, which is what the movement worldwide absolutely requires if we're going to defeat US-led imperialism. As an example, I am a co-coordinator of the May 1st Coalition for Worker Immigrant Rights here in New York City. At the planning meetings of that coalition, followers of both Trotsky and Stalin not only sit side by side, they happily cooperate in planning the future activities. So what's the problem? Why should the cooperation stop there? If we can cooperate there, why can't we be in the same organization? In other words, we got to find a way to stop this sectarianism and find a way to work together, pool our resources so we can be more powerful. The sectarianism of the past was based historically on the needs of the Soviet bureaucracy. That's how it came about. And in the crisis of a country that made a revolution in the most backward country where the workers and the peasants were mostly illiterate, it was a situation that you had to have czarist-trained bureaucrats be brought in to help run the government. This was a situation that isn't existing today here. We have the most highly developed economic world, especially in the United States, a highly developed working class that can read, that is skilled. It is a wholly different situation. That Soviet bureaucracy and that conditions that created that sectarianism is long gone. The policies of Stalin, which were very social democratic, not communist, because of the pressures from that bureaucracy, they're all gone. What you have is people who are fighting and are not really the type of people that Stalin was appealing to, calling themselves Stalinists now, who are real fighters. And why do we have to be separate based on this historical anomaly? Yes, there are all too many misnamed communist parties. That's not what we're talking about here. Those communist parties are mostly living relics of a past era. Not all of them. Some of them are not. But most of them are living relics of a past era. But there is a change in the world now. Numerous individuals and groups that call themselves Stalinists out of a misunderstanding of history, not out of a lack of revolutionary fighting spirit or desire. We must find a way to end this sectarianism. In the ideological battle between Trotsky and Stalin, I firmly support Trotsky. Yet I want to see the day where today's, not yesterday's, today's followers of Trotsky and Stalin can sit side by side in the same party like they did before Lenin's death without giving up their political ideas. A party where those ideas can be debated, and once a decision is made on an action, that unity in action is the result. Workers and oppressed of the world, let's unite. Victory to the working class. Please visit my website. It is MikeGimbel.com. You can email me with your comments at Cayman@ptd.net. That's C-A-I-M-A-N @PTD, that's Paul Thomas David, .net. Thank you.